Hello and welcome to Unstress. I'm Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Where does our food come from? What are some of the challenges for people on the farms growing the very food we need to survive, and if they're doing it really well and we support them, growing the food we need to thrive, not just for us now, but for our children, our grandchildren, and future generations? These are serious questions, and some others include: what is low-stress stockmanship? What can animals teach us about stress? What's the difference between climate change and climate variability? Did you know that in a teaspoon of healthy soil, there are 6 billion microorganisms? And it's the soil that 7.5 billion people on this planet depend on. Well, my guest today is Grahame Rees, farmer and educator. Grahame is a fourth-generation sheep and wool producer who grew up on the family property at Ivanhoe in Western New South Wales. Now, as you will hear, he has a passion for people, livestock and the rangelands. Grahame has spent the last 20 years with his wife Ros and 2 children on their property, Penina, near Ivanhoe, building on his knowledge, as well as participating in grazing and management programs in Australia and around the world. In 1999, Grahame was inspired by an innovative approach to farming, which ignited an interest in low-stress stock handling. Over the next couple of years, Grahame and Ros experienced the benefits of handling livestock using those methods. And in 2002, Grahame joined with some partners to deliver low-stress stock handling schools right across Australia, now assisting thousands of livestock handlers to improve their livestock handling. I hope you enjoyed this conversation I had with Grahame Rees. Welcome to the show, Grahame.
Hey Ron, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for joining us. Look, this whole story of connecting with the land, bringing what's going on in farmers' lives to the city so that we can all understand it a little better. And there's so much I wanted to talk to you today about. But I wondered if you might share with our listener a bit about your own story, how you got to where you are now.
Thanks, Ron. I think it's interesting. I grew up and spent most of my life on an outback sheep station at a place called Ivanhoe near Broken Hill, which is 900 kilometres west of Sydney. And it's interesting that at the time of recording this, I'm visiting my daughter in Sydney, and I was only on the beach yesterday with her, and I said, you know, it's hard to understand there's anything out there. You know, I can really relate to how somebody in the city can't necessarily relate to somebody in the country, and then there's me out there 900 kilometres away. How do I relate to people? And I think, you know, that's part of this changing world. We used to live in small communities, but now we're a much broader world. So I spent most of my life out there. We ran a sheep station, and I guess, you know, you went through all the challenges of running a livestock business, whether it be, you know, probably more droughts than floods and high prices and low prices. You know, you go through the highs of the wool industry and the lows of the wool industry. And so I guess one of the things that I was challenged with is, how do I, you know, build more profitability into my business, and how do I build more sustainability into my business? And so that led me onto a path of education. And I think, you know, nothing's going to change unless we do start down a path of thinking a little differently. And so I guess, you know, that started quite a long time ago, 20 odd years ago, when I went and learned how to manage my animals better, manage my grass better. And then in 1999, I had a gentleman by the name of Bud Williams come to Australia, and he taught me low-stress stockmanship. Now, I thought I was pretty good at that.
Yeah. What a great name, low-stress stockmanship.
Exactly, and you know, I think it fits right in with what you're doing, Unstress, because what I put that into my own business, but then learned how to teach it, and so that's one of the programs I teach today. Is I go around teaching people how to handle animals in a low-stress way, which in effect gives us a better product on the plate. It gives us better profitability, and we have the animals less stressed, Ron.
Yes, this is good. Grahame, we're going to be talking about low stress stockmanship for sure. Yeah, but you go on. This is 1999 when you were introduced to this concept. Of course, there's almost 20 years that have gone since then.
Exactly. And so one of the challenges when you live in an outback, on an outback station is you've got to educate your children, and that's not too difficult to do for primary school. You know, you can use correspondence, school of the year, homeschooling, little school. We had a little school down the road where we drove. We averaged 3 hours a day driving just to and from school. It was a school of six kids,
wow.
And 5 of them were cousins, and so a great upbringing for those children in primary school. But when it came to high school, we needed to look for something different, and so it became boarding school. And Ashley, our daughter, she went off to boarding school, but we were still driving Brad, you know, those 3 hours a day. And it just came a day where we said, you know what, we can't keep this up. We'd just done 2,500 kilometres this week just for school without any work. And so to remove the stress, I guess, we moved to Bathurst and decided to put our Ashley and Bradley into day school, which opened up a huge opportunity for me to start teaching. Now, I never knew how to teach, but I guess, you know, there's a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, and you don't have to read the book, you just read the cover and you go, oh, well, I might be fearful of this, but let's get into it. And, you know, today in that program, I've trained over 3,000, you know, producers, people in the whole livestock industry. So that's been really rewarding, and animals can teach us so much because they tell us when they're stressed very, very quickly, whereas I think we as humans tend to kind of hide that, you know.
Now, listen, surely, and I think a lot of people think about this, you know, you've grown up on a farm, your mum and your dad, your family has been farmers, or you've gone to ag school. You know, what's there to learn, Grahame?
Yeah, so exactly.
I know the answer to that in case everybody listening is going, what is this guy even talking about? But it's the start of a conversation, Grahame. Please go on.
Well, exactly, Ron, and I think it's you know, I suppose I've often said to you, you know, how does a dentist get into health and you know, and food and the way we live, and how does a dentist get into Unstress? Because it was the same for me, you know, how does a farmer get into this? And I think one of the challenges we have is that a lot of education is very much about it's about production. You know, in agriculture especially, we have become so production focused that we're missing the main point, and that is profit. And, you know, another program I teach at Livestock Marketing School, we really recognise that the only thing that's going to allow people to remain profitable is that word, have some profit. And, you know, often I'll be talking to a group of producers and they go, no, I've never seen that word before.
Really?
No. You know.
Yeah, we're about survival.
Exactly. And so a production-based system will always give us more product, but at what cost? What cost to the bottom line? The more we produce, you know, a good example is, you know, people go, well, we need to put a feedlot in. Well, there's the overheads of putting that feedlot in, but then there's all the inputs of the grains that we've got to put in there, the hay we've got to put in there, the staff we've got to have to run it, and then there's, you know, we get sick animals, so now we've got to give them all these injections. And so I see a huge contrast, Ron, between that sort of industry, that industrial agriculture, if you like, and the producers, which is most of the producers I work with, you know, basically producing a grass-fed product, basically working with nature. And, you know, we're sitting here November 2018 in a time when a lot of Eastern Australia is experiencing a drought that it's the biggest drought in 100 years. Talking to one of my clients near Broken Hill last week, he had 22 millimetres. Sorry, it had 18 millimetres, and that was his biggest rainfall in 22 months.
Wow. Yes, I heard this morning that Western Queensland hasn't had a good rain for 7 years.
Correct. So my business colleague lives in. He's been in drought for 6 years. But it's about understanding that that's just part of the cycle, and so they're not actually in bad shape. They're in good shape. They've been proactive in some of the things they're doing, and I think again that's the difference. There's people that go and get some education, and that's what we do. We help those people actually understand a decision-making process. And if we can't all make the right decisions, but if we recognise we've made a wrong one, we can easily correct that. And, yeah.
Just to put it in perspective for our listener, Grahame, industrial agriculture, the model that is very production-based, what proportion of our agribusiness is production-based, in your estimation?
Look, I think there's various degrees of it, Ron, and I think we've got to be careful when we look at some of the information that we see, especially online, about industrial agriculture and feedlotting, and so if we look at America, a huge amount of livestock, for instance, finished in feedlots, and that's not necessarily the case here in Australia. It's much less. It's longer fed in America, which is going to, that changes that whole omega-3, omega-6 ratio. The longer they're fed, we're much more short fed. So it is less here, but I suppose when I use the word industrial agriculture, I'm talking about, lots of artificial fertilizers when it comes to cropping, lots of chemicals. There's been huge debates about glyphosate, fungicides, those sorts of things. And I think there's, what we've talked a lot about in the past is a sustainable agriculture. There's a huge shift going on right now. It's with regenerative agriculture. And so, Charlie Massey, who you've had as a guest on the show, Charlie wrote a book, The Call of the Reed Warbler.
Fabulous book.
Absolutely. And it's not Charlie's opinion all the way through. He's got case study after case study after case study. And so there's a huge shift to thinking about regenerative agriculture. And I think, it's not just about fixing the land. It's not just about fixing the food. It's about ensuring that those producers that are producing food or fibre in that regenerative agriculture space are actually profitable, because otherwise, and that doesn't mean just profitable from, when I use the word profitable, everyone just goes, dollar signs. And no, it's got to be profitable for the resource. We're really looking at building biological and the soil, building soil.
I wanted to talk to you, and this is, you've already identified some of the challenges that people face on the land, and that one of educating your kids and that time travelled is a huge impost on your week. I mean, I can only imagine 2,000 kilometres in 1 week of transporting kids to and from school. You've also mentioned climate change and how vulnerable people are to that. And then this difference between product and profit. But this difference between sustainability and regenerative, can you explain to our listener, what's the difference?
Okay, well, I think just something you mentioned there. So when we talk about, there's a lot of conversation about climate change. And I guess, language is important for me in how I communicate things. And so I don't think of it in terms of climate change. I think of it in terms of climate variability. And I think that helps us understand a little bit better that, climate change is kind of, it just comes down to what various opinions are, and we're going down this path. But the reality is this planet has had climate variability since day dot. Living, when I talk to my producers about living inside the boundary fence, and so what can I do to work with climate variability inside my fence? And so sustainability is really about status quo. And boy, the status quo isn't where we need to be. We need to be regenerating land. We need to be regenerating the water resource. A good example is Gabe Brown has just written a book, and if people haven't read that book, Dirt to Soil, it really will open up your eyes to what's possible over a 20-year period. When Gabe, he's in North Dakota, started, he had a 20. I think he's in a 20-inch rainfall, but he had a water infiltration rate of 30 minutes for 2 inches of rain to go into the soil.
So that means it has to rain for 30 minutes before you get 2 minutes absorption into the soil.
No,
but before you get 2 inches absorption into the soil.
Well, yes. So he basically poured the equivalent of 2 inches onto the soil, and it took 30 minutes for that to be not lying on top of the soil. It infiltrated. It now takes 11 seconds.
Wow.
That's, you don't need to know any more than that. It's like, wow. And so that's the interesting thing when we talk about climate change or climate variability, is that it doesn't matter whether we got more rain or less rain. What's relevant is how much did I keep on get into my soil, it get infiltrated in the soil. So if I have a better soil water infiltration rate, based on Gabe's figures, we actually need a minute amount of rain if I had a very poor infiltration rate.
Yeah, because that's a double-edged sword, isn't it? You're hanging out for rain. The ground is so dry and poor that when it does rain, it washes away your resource, your soil.
Exactly. And so, that's what we work with. The people we work with is destocking at appropriate times, keeping ground cover in their soil. I mean, I manage a place at Bathurst where, people would say, oh, well, that's a high rainfall area. We've had no stock there now for 20 months, and because it's very much about the long term, making sure that we get the soil so when it does rain properly, we've got productivity and proper productivity, not just, we're not mining. We don't want to be mining our land. We need to be farming it, and that requires some change in thinking, some education, and some confidence that it's going to work, because farming can be a very precarious place to be where you're not guaranteed of an income every year.
Now you took people. I know we had a chat about this, and I was so interested to hear this story. You took a group of farmers on a tour in the United States. It was about regenerative agriculture. I wonder if you could share with our listener what that was about and some of the highlights.
Yep. Yeah. So, Ron, we have a mastermind group as part of our KLR marketing program, and back in 2003, I'd done a road trip with Bud Williams, and I just said one day I want to bring some people back, and so this year I took 22 people over to the US, and our goal was to look at profitable regenerative agriculture. It was very important that it was profitable, because it's all very well to do things that are going to be great for the land, but if we're not profitable, that doesn't keep the right people there. So, and we were really going to look at, we keep it pretty basic. We're not really that much we're not into cropping, although some of our people are. We went to look at grass, money, and livestock, how those three interact. And we landed in Dallas and hired 5 cars, and we went on a tour up through Missouri, Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and it was what was extraordinary was not just what we saw, but the people we met. And the first day we met Walt Davis in in Texas. And, Walt is somebody who, what did he say? I went to university and then it took me 20 years to educate myself out of all that. And, he sat there very serious and he looked at us and he goes, well, I want to be really honest with you. I was once a serial killer. And we're like, what? He said, yep, I spent all my days trying to kill everything. I tried to kill every bug, every insect, every weed, I just sprayed so much chemical out trying to kill things. And he said, I realized that I was killing some of the very things that were going to build my soil. And he said, your wealth is in the health of your soil. And Walt's in his 80s, and so he was very enlightening into somebody who really now today understands this stuff, and even to the point where he said, it really is important if you don't just farm for the farm. He said, I neglected my family, and he said, if I was to say something to you today, you young people, he said, get a balance in your life. You don't want to be, you want to balance, which is what you really talk about, getting balance in your life.
It's a challenge for all of us.
It is absolutely a challenge. So at the end of that day, the whole group said, well, that's paid for the trip.
Day one.
Day one.
Fantastic.
And I said, you ain't seen nothing yet. And I, Bud's passed away now, but his wife, Eunice, she brought a group of people together and we had what she called the International Bud Summit. And one of the guys, there was two quotes that I pulled out of that. One of the guys there that's using the bud marketing principles and stockmanship, and we were talking about, I suppose things like drought or things like poor management. And he said, and government subsidies. And he said, if you cap failure, you're going to cap success. And what he was saying is that, when we subsidise people that aren't managing their business properly or subsidising people through various situations, he said, when you're capping failure, you're capping the success of the people that are doing a really good job. And I thought that was really important. And I think the other one that Wally Olson, he said, most people procrastinate about starting something. He said, just start something and then you can manage it. And I think we whether it's it doesn't matter whether it's a meditation practice or maybe it's an exercise program or maybe it's eating differently, whatever it is, just start, because otherwise we'll just get caught in procrastination.
Because Bud Williams, who you mentioned, passed in Eunice, he introduced you to this concept of low-stress stockmanship, and I wonder, just pausing on the tour for a moment, because Eunice has, his wife has just held this Bud meeting. What is low-stress stockmanship?
Well, great question, Ron, and I think Bud had spent most of his life studying animals and the way they work, and he spent the last 9 years working in a feedlot in Canada because that's where you can measure things, So that's the reason why he did it. But if we think of it this way, for thousands of years we've interacted with animals, and we've either interacted with them in a predatory way or a non-predatory way. And the way that we handle animals today in most situations is in the way a predator handles it. And so the animals are stressed. They're just wanting to survive. And so changing the way we work around those animals in a non-predatory way can actually get better results for us. Things are quicker, faster, easier. But also those animals are putting on more production. For instance, an animal that is low stress on average will graze for 45 minutes longer than a stressed animal. A researcher found a sheep can recognize up to 50 human faces for 2 years. So we really don't know much about animals. We're still learning, but it's extraordinary what you can achieve in terms of, the way animals, they're easy to work, they're easy to achieve something with. but also it's very rewarding for the people. A lot of your listeners won't relate to this, but if they've ever been in the stockyards, I often talk to a group of farmers and I go, you wouldn't believe this, but I've just been to Western Australia where some women have stormed off from their husbands in the yards because they got yelled at. And they the women all put their hand up. No, it happens here too. Or, the kids say it's okay to swear in the yards. And I go, well, actually, no, I'd rather you swore in the kitchen because those animals don't need your frustration and anger around them. And so it's kind of interesting that we run livestock, but most people get out of bed in the morning and think it's going to be a bad day in the stockyards. I don't. I get out excited and go, wow, wonder what I'm going to learn off these animals today.
It's interesting because as humans, if we eat when we're stressed, we could be on the best diet in the world or taking the best supplements in the world, but because we're stressed, blood's not circulating around the digestive tract, it's circulating around muscles, and so you just don't absorb your nutrients. So that's actually, I keep on learning these things, Grahame. The similarities between the oral microbiome, the gut microbiome, the soil microbiome, diversity is resilience. And here you're telling me lower stressed animals are healthier animals because they graze longer and probably absorb their nutrients better.
Well, exactly. And, one of the things Bud said to me, he said, feed and water is important to animals, but he said proper exercise, especially in a feedlot, is so important because you want to free their mind up. You want to relax them, just like us. You think about it. If we were sat down in a couch and someone kept bringing us chips and lollies for the next 90 days or 100 days, what sort of a mental state would we be in? We can't get out of the couch. That's it. And that's, in essence, what it is. So proper exercise is those sorts of things can really help animals. And so, yeah, I think it's so important because, we have a saying, attitude is everything. And, your attitude is really going to influence those animals because way we communicate with people is body language. Same with animals; they're reading that stuff all the time. And I'm sure you don't in your dental practice use an electric prodder, but if you hit someone,
what an idea!
If you hit someone with if you hit an animal with an electric prodder, it's going to release cortisone, which reduces the ability of the immune system to react, and so those sorts of situations can, we can make it better. And I'm just, it's been so exciting to be able to share and teach that with people, right across Australia.
Now, gee, Grahame, this is a 21-day tour, and we're up to day 2 with Eunice teaching us or reminding us about low-stress stockmanship, and Gabe Brown talking to us about water infiltration rate. Go on. Give us another highlight.
Well, we headed off across Kansas, and it's pretty funny over in the States because, they all put the other state down, and so we're in Texas, and they said, we heard you're going across Kansas. And I said, yeah. They said, did you know they're building a scenic route across there? They're putting in a tunnel. And so I wasn't sure what to expect when I got to Kansas, but cropping's not my deal, so I don't know a lot about cropping, but two of the group really insisted that we go and have a look at cover cropping. And cover cropping is basically instead of, there might be a cash crop like in their case wheat, barley, corn, soybean, something like that. So they'll grow that cover crop and then the ground will remain bare for the rest of the time, a bit the same as we do here. And cover cropping is very much about putting a cover in over that. So they'll use an example is we arrived at a fellow called Michael Thompson's ranch, and he took us out, and he was standing in a field there was about 20 different species, everything from radishes to sunflowers to everything. And the reason they plant many different species is the soil microorganisms get different things from different plants. And in that field, he said 30 days ago we harvested wheat. We came in right behind the harvester and sowed this. And there we were standing in this field of beautiful stand of cover crop, waist high, and we had a soil probe, and the moisture was just unbelievable. It was just as even a long-term time farmer in the group who was more traditional said, if I didn't see this with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe it. And
because what typically happens in Australia? I mean, the cash crop being the wheat, the barley, the oats go in, and it usually takes how many months between sowing and harvesting?
So normally the wheat crop would be put in around that April, May period in Australia, and probably through to June, and then it's harvested any time from October through to or probably in the south, December, January. So, and then it's harvested, and then it's left, and it's very much high input, high input type farming, and so what that's not doing is not building the soil. We're putting in lots of artificial fertilizer, we're putting in chemicals.
So in that period between October, December, and April, when the new crop is put in, the ground is bare?
The ground is bare, and it's very well. It'll have the stubble there, but it's very much about controlling moisture. If they get a rain, they'll spray those weeds. But this is very much about building.
So what Michael was doing was putting in all these cover crops in between those things. Wow. Okay. Exactly. And so there's a book called Against the Grain, and I've been listening to it. It's a very long book, but it goes right back to the beginning of time, really. And in this book, he talks about how they drained all the marshes and they put water on the dry lands. So they really mucked that up. This is in the Middle East there, but it was 10,000 years ago when grain was introduced, and the reason wheat and barley was introduced 10,000 years ago wasn't for food. What he says in that book is that's what it was able to allow the state to start to control people, because now we could get people living in one place, and so now we've got a bit of control of people. The second thing was that why they grew wheat and barley was it was very predictable when harvest happened. So therefore, the taxman knew when to turn up and pick that up. It was very easy for a raiding army to come and steal the grain. It was very easy for a raiding army to come and burn all your fields. And then there were a group that just wouldn't conform, and he called them the barbarians, and they grew things that could stay in the ground for 3 or 4 years, like potatoes. And, the analogy is when the raiding army came, they said, here's a shovel, go and dig it up, But why I bring that up, Ron, is what we got then was the taxman. Now we have the taxman, the fertilizer man, the chemical man, the new equipment sales man, the bank man. And so what that's probably addresses a lot of your industrial agriculture question earlier, is that everybody's taking a piece out of the system, but we're not regenerating the very thing. So take Michael Thompson, for instance. He shared with us that he's one of 3 producers at his local bank that's out of 120 that's profitable. He uses 1 hit of a nitrogen fertilizer when he sows his crops, no more. He uses no fungicides, no herbicides, no insecticides at all. His neighbours would use anything from 8 to 15. And he's harvesting about the same amount of grain off those crops. But he's I think he gave me his figures, but he's doing less and making more, which is, he's using that free ecosystem of sunlight, water, keeping water on his land, making sure the effect and farming like nature made us to be farming, and getting good returns every year, not just riding the waves. I'm intrigued by that. 3 out of 120 that are profitable. Surely, I mean, are we so stuck in our ways that those 117 other farmers aren't turning around and going, Michael, what are you doing that makes you profitable? Can you please share that with me? Because I want to be profitable too.
Oh, we're funny human beings, aren't we? I'm sure I could ask you the same question, you know. I'm sure there's not many dentists come and say, Ron, how can I be more holistic in my dental practice?
Yeah, we love it's an interesting question though, isn't it? Because we love certainty, and even if that certainty is wrong, we somehow feel very comfortable there.
Exactly. Well, there's plenty of research that shows that you know, we would rather stay with what we know, you know, even if it's being a victim, even if it's not a place where we want to be. To step outside is, you know, it's fearful. It's in you know, I think there's not enough support for people to really help them through that process. You know, there's another great book which I never read. I just saw it in the bookshelf, and when I got it, and the title of that book was Plan Your Own Destiny or Someone Else Will. Yeah. And I think you know, there's plenty of people would like to try things and do things, and that's what's been unique, Ron, about the group we went with, is that whilst most of the people didn't know each other before the tour. In fact, there's a couple I didn't know. And by the end of it, we added up, there were over 5,000 hours of conversation. But that group, after 22 days, is so tight in their communication. You know, in fact, at 12 o'clock today, we have a monthly call, and so we'll actually be talking to Michael Thompson. And so, you know, they want to keep it going and keep supporting each other. The other person we visited while we were in Kansas is a fellow called Gail Fuller. And Gail's got a long story, and people could go and look up Gail Fuller online because there are YouTube videos of him and actually Walt Davis. But Gail Fuller was pushed to the brink really with government subsidies and not being paid out. And so he's had to work with very little capital to actually build up his enterprise. But what he's learned along the way was very important. It was a unique day because he provided lunch for us, and every single thing from the meat to the salads to the wine had been grown on his place. And he related very much the soil ecosystem to the human gut biome. He related very much those two things, and I think it was it was very good how what he shared with us. And you know, one of the things that here's a bit of research people can go and look for, but he said, don't worry about glyphosate. He said, what you want to worry about is RNAI technology.
Hang on now. Glyphosate, of course, is Roundup.
Correct.
But the other one was I think it's something like RNAI technology. Okay. And I was going to ask you to spell that, but then I realised you were. RNAI.
It's something like that, but it's genetic manipulation, but it doesn't need any approval.
Right.
And so what they're doing with the particular plant he was talking about, what it'll do is suppress the reproductive desire for insects, and it'll suppress their appetite. And there's been no research at all on what effect that might have on the food chain, the human biome, or anything. So there's, you know, he lifted a lid on things that we'd never heard of. It was amazing to spend that day with Gail, and so it opened up my eyes about, you know, cover cropping and what's possible. And I think that's the thing is as humans, we kind of think about what's impossible, and we need to start to think about what's possible. You know, nothing's impossible. Everything's possible. We just got to find a way. I mean, hell, we'd have never got to the moon if we'd have thought it was impossible.
Yeah, Yeah, look, I guess one of the other challenges facing everyone, farmers particularly, is isolation. And one of the nice things about modern technology, like you are today, going to be talking to Michael Thompson, and I guess, your group are spread around Australia.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. They came from 5 states.
Yeah, so I think I know you are too, Grahame. I think we're both optimists, and I think we can see great potential in our ability to communicate, which is one of the reasons why you and I are sitting here today and talking.
Exactly. It's a small world, and that does allow us to. It allows the individual like yourself, Ron, to have a podcast and get the message out there. Because in the past, that was controlled by the TV stations and the media owners, and it's still to some extent today controlled if you want to go traditional. But that's the beauty about a podcast. Exactly. Anybody, anywhere can listen to this and get the most up-to-date, thought-provoking information.
Now, Grahame, one of the things I feel pretty passionate about, I think you know this, is for more people in the city to connect with their food, and by that they have to be connected with what goes on out on the farm. If you were talking to people in the city who were wanting to do that, what would be a couple of tips you would give our listener to say, hey, here's how you can engage?
Well, Ron, one of the things that really got me on this path was I'd interviewed Dr. Christine Jones about soil health. She's one of Australia's leading soil scientists and one of the world's leading soil scientists, actually. And it was kind of funny. I interviewed her in an interview because I do a similar type podcast to you, and she said to me, there's 6 billion organisms in a healthy teaspoon of soil, and 7 billion people are relying on that. and she said, at the end of the call, she said, you know what, there's somebody called Nora Getgatis coming to Australia. I reckon you should interview her. And, that's how we met, Ron.
That's exactly right.
You sponsored and brought Nora out here, and we met in at that time, and what hit me was when I met Nora and heard what her story was. The connection is between food health, human health, and soil health, and there's an absolute direct connection to that, And so, I coined the phrase life in a teaspoon because, life very much relies on that teaspoon of healthy soil. So what I think is we see a lot of conversation about paddock to plate. In the farming industry, people are studying how can we, take our food from the paddock to the plate. Well, I think it needs to be reversed, because I think it's from the plate to the paddock. So people that aren't in farming, maybe they've never been west. I'm using Sydney as the analogy, but any city, but they've never been Penrith as far west as they've been in Sydney, and so they haven't actually seen the country. But they can still start to ask, what this food on my plate, where did it come from? This meat, is this grass-fed meat or is it feedlot meat? Is this are these plants grown in a there's organic, and there's a misconception that organic's the best. One of the challenges is that organics have so many rules around them that sometimes essential nutrients are missing. So I like to use the phrase, more biodynamic. Is this food coming from a biodynamic farm? How do I connect to my food? And so, we have farmers markets and the like, but I'd invite people in the city to connect with a farmer. Go and connect. Farmers don't donate $20 for a bale of hay. Go and connect with a farmer and spend a day with a farmer walking, especially someone who's a regenerative farmer, walking about his field and learning what happens. And he could learn a lot from you as well. And, I think we used to have a time, Ron, when we had city cousins and country cousins, and in the school holidays, the city cousins got sent out to the country so their parents could keep working. We don't have that today. And so we have kids growing up it's not their fault. everybody's trying to get on with their life, but I think we need to connect people more to food. If a very small amount of our income is spent on food, we'll go and spend it on Netflix and on all of those things, entertainment, but we get very tight on, oh no, I don't want to buy grass-fed meat because that's too expensive. But it's very nutrient-dense food is what we need to be looking for. And boy, it's so much about our health. I did a podcast with someone yesterday. They interviewed me, and it wasn't to do with this really. It was about me and my life. And they said, here you are at 60. What why aren't you taking pills and unhealthy? And I said, well, because, it's related to the food I eat. I eat a more ketogenic diet. I eat a clean diet. I'm eating food that is going to enhance my health, regenerate my health, not, lots of people would say at 60, oh, well, you're over the hill. But, when I turned 60, I said, well, I feel like I'm 21. I reckon I've lived about 50% of my life, so I've still got another 60 to go. So I better do a few things to give that every chance it can.
Music to my ears, Grahame, music to my ears. Listen, last thing, I just wanted to ask before we finish up, and taking a step back from your role, bringing this message to so many farmers and to the public, taking a step back from it, what do you, we're all on a health journey in our lives. What do you think the biggest challenge is today for us as individuals on our health journey through life in our modern world?
Well, I think, it is stress. It's, and if we go back to the ages when we were a caveman, it's kind of logical that you'd think you get out of bed in the morning and I've got to go and kill a dinosaur for lunch kind of thing. And you'd think that's pretty stressful. But actually, those people didn't really have much stress, because whilst they might have, had to have they might have been in a fight or something like that, or had to go and get in a dangerous place to get an animal, they actually spent the majority of their time very relaxed, and they didn't continually, spontaneously get our stresses up. Whereas today, we get out of bed and we're stressed, and then if we turn the news on, we're going to be more stressed, and then we get in the car to go to work, and we can be going along and we're either jammed up with the traffic and stress, or I often note myself when I'm driving and a policeman comes in behind me, I'm not even breaking the law, but I feel the stress of that guy behind me. And so I think that's, and the same with farmers. So I think, this busy life can get us stressed, and that's why it's so important to get our food right, get some proper exercise, get things like meditation. All of those things are so, so important, and not only going to enhance our longevity, but it's going to enhance, probably what's more important than longevity is the moment we've got right now.
Grahame, what a great note to finish on. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to have links to your KLR website, and you've got some great resources there and podcasts, and hopefully we can get more people in the city connecting with more people in the country. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Ron. It's been great to have a chat with you.
It's so important for us to hear about the challenges that people living on the land have, because they are so essential to our own health and well-being. I feel really passionate about this idea that we in the city need to connect with those on the land. Quite literally, our health and the ongoing health of the planet is in their hands. So understanding and supporting those people is, I believe, really important. In February 2019, I'll be going up to Armidale and presenting a workshop called Unstress and Simply Be Well in association with the local land care group. I'm hoping to stop in along the way and visit some farms and record some of their stories for this show. I'm also struck by similarities. Whether we're talking about the soil, gut or oral microbiome, the more diverse, the more resilient and the healthier they all are. The story of glyphosate or Roundup keeps re-emerging. Go back and listen to that podcast with Charles Massey, author of that fabulous book that we referred to, The Call of the Reed Warbler. And of course that episode with farming legend Joel Salatin. Folks, this ain't normal, but it could be. A stressed animal is not a happy or healthy animal, in the same way a stressed human isn't. And low-stress stock handling is clearly on the agenda for a growing number of farmers. We, humans, have had a long relationship with animals throughout our evolutionary history, and the last 40 or 50 years of industrialised farming practices based on production, well, we seem to have lost sight of not just a more humane way of dealing with animals, but a healthier way for animals and humans alike. And importantly, and this is really important, a potentially less stressed and more profitable way of life for farmers themselves. Grahame mentioned a book by Gabe Brown, Dirt to Soil. Must have a look at that one, and we'll have links to Graham's website, KLR Marketing. We've got a lot in common, Grahame and I, but we're coming at it from different perspectives. I hope we can do more stuff together. So until next week, this is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Be well. This podcast provides general information and discussion about medicine, health and related subjects. The content is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice or as a substitute for care by a qualified medical practitioner. If you or any other person has a medical concern, he or she should consult with an appropriately qualified medical